You were never anything! Take your trash bags and get off my property! Then why is a lawyer calling to tell me I now control your entire empire?
The rain had soaked through my coat when the phone rang. 20 minutes earlier, my mother-in-law had thrown my entire life into 2 trash bags, and my husband had watched without saying a word. Now a lawyer I had never met was telling me that by sunrise, the mansion behind me, and the company that paid for it, could belong to me. But only if I survived what the Montgomery family had planned for midnight. Hello, my name is Alyssa Reed. For 6 years, I was Alyssa Montgomery, the quiet wife standing beside one of the richest men in Virginia. Everyone thought I had married into power. The truth was that I had married into a trap, and on the worst night of my life, I finally found the key. It began on a Thursday evening in October. The sky over Richmond had turned dark before dinner, and rain struck the tall windows of the Montgomery estate like handfuls of gravel. I had spent most of the day at St. Catherine's Hospice, sitting beside Evelyn Montgomery, my husband's grandmother. Evelyn was 84 and dying from heart failure. She was also the founder of Montgomery Heritage Group, a company that owned hotels, apartment buildings, and commercial property across 3 states. To the public, Beatrice Montgomery, my mother-in-law, was the face of the family. She attended charity galas, gave interviews, and loved being photographed beside oversized donation checks. But Evelyn had built the empire. She had started with one boarding house after her husband died. Then she bought a second building, then a small hotel. She understood money, but she understood people better. That was why Beatrice feared her. Evelyn had never trusted Beatrice with full control of the company. Even after Innes forced her to step away, she kept her voting shares inside a private trust. For the last 8 months, I had been the person visiting her almost every day. Jacob, my husband, always had an excuse. His mother said hospitals made her anxious. Other relatives sent flowers and called the nurses for updates, but few entered Evelyn's room. I went because I loved her. Evelyn was sharp even when her body was weak. She asked about my work, my childhood, and the dreams I had stopped mentioning after I married Jacob. Before the Montgomerys, I had been a junior forensic accountant. I loved following numbers until they told the truth. After the wedding, Beatrice convinced Jacob that my career embarrassed the family. A Montgomery wife doesn't chase receipts in a little office, she had said. Jacob asked me to resign. He promised it would only be temporary. Temporary became 6 years. That Thursday, Evelyn held my wrist as I prepared to leave the hospice. "Do not sign anything tonight," she whispered. I leaned closer. "What do you mean?" Her eyes moved toward the open door. A nurse passed in the hallway. "They know time is short," Evelyn said. "And desperate people make careless moves." I asked who she meant, but she released my wrist and closed her eyes. "Go home, Alyssa. Watch Jacob's face when his mother speaks. His face will tell you what his mouth will not." Those were the last words Evelyn ever said to me. When I arrived at the estate, Beatrice was waiting at the top of the marble staircase. Jacob stood behind her in the doorway. He wore a charcoal suit, and his expression was so empty that for one strange second, I wondered whether I had entered the wrong house. 2 black trash bags sat beside Beatrice's shoes. One contained my clothes. The other held framed photographs, toiletries, and the small wooden box where I kept letters from my late mother. "You were never anything," Beatrice said. "Now get off my property before I call the police." Then she threw both bags down the steps. One split open. My gray sweater slid across the wet stone. I looked at Jacob. "What is happening?" He stared at his phone. Beatrice smiled. "Your marriage is over, Jacob." He finally looked at me. For a moment, I saw guilt. Then his face hardened. "Mom found the transfers," he said. "What transfers?" Held up several bank statements. My name was printed at the top. The pages showed payments from a Montgomery Company account into an account supposedly owned by me. The total was $840,000. I almost laughed because the accusation was so absurd. "I have never seen that account." "Of course you haven't," Beatrice said. "Thieves rarely recognize their crimes when witnesses are present." She told me that the family would not press charges if I signed a separation agreement immediately. The document was waiting inside. I would give up any claim to marital property, leave with $10,000, and never speak publicly about the Montgomery family. Then I understood Evelyn's warning. "Do not sign anything tonight. Let me see the statements," I said. Beatrice pulled them against her chest. "We have seen enough. The routing numbers, transaction dates, and authorization codes will show where the money actually went." Her smile disappeared. Jacob stepped forward. "Just sign, Alyssa. Don't make this uglier." I studied his face, exactly as Evelyn had told me to do. He was afraid, not angry, not betrayed, afraid. "You know these statements are false," I said. His jaw tightened. That silence ended our marriage more completely than any divorce decree could. I bent down, gathered my wet belongings, and placed them back into the torn bags. Beatrice expected me to beg. I could see it in the way she lifted her chin. Instead, I said, "Keep the agreement. You may need the paper." "For what?" she asked. "To explain why you were so desperate for my signature." I carried the bags through the iron gate and walked toward the main road. The estate sat nearly a mile from the nearest bus stop. By the time I reached it, rainwater was running down my neck, and one bag had split completely. I sat beneath the narrow shelter with my mother's letters pressed beneath my coat. My phone showed 3% battery. Then an unfamiliar number appeared. I answered. "Mrs. Montgomery." A man asked. "My name is Samuel Pierce. I am Evelyn Montgomery's private attorney. I'm sorry to tell you that Evelyn died at 7:42 this evening." The traffic disappeared. The rain disappeared. For several seconds, there was only grief. I had known Evelyn was dying, but knowledge did not make the loss smaller. "I was with her this afternoon," I whispered. "I know. She left instructions concerning you." I nearly ended the call. I assumed he meant a piece of jewelry or a letter. Then he said, "Evelyn transferred her controlling interest in Montgomery Heritage Group into a trust. You are the sole voting trustee." I looked through the rain toward the distant lights of the estate. "That cannot be right." "It is. The trust controls 51% of all voting shares. Effective upon her death, you control the company." My hand began to shake. He continued. "There is another problem. Evelyn believed someone inside the company was stealing money and preparing to sell its most valuable properties. She believed they would attempt to force your signature tonight." The false statements. The separation agreement, Jacob's fear. Everything locked into place. Why would my signature matter? Because 6 weeks ago, Evelyn quietly named you successor trustee. Beatrice learned part of the plan, but she does not know the transfer became irrevocable this afternoon. If you signed a broad waiver before midnight, she intended to argue that you had surrendered any financial interest connected to the family. Would that have worked? Probably not, but it would have tied the trust up in court for years, long enough for certain assets to disappear. I watched a bus pass without stopping. Samuel told me to go to a secure location. He had arranged a room at a downtown hotel under my maiden name. At 9 the next morning, I was to attend an emergency board meeting. Before ending the call, he gave me one more warning. "Do not tell Beatrice what you know." Evelyn believed the theft was larger than anyone realized. My phone died. A black sedan pulled beside the shelter. Samuel had sent his paralegal, Nora Chen, to collect me. Nora was about my age, with a calm voice and the alert eyes of someone who missed very little. She placed my bags in the trunk and handed me a dry coat. "Mrs. Montgomery." "Alyssa?" I said. "Please." "Alyssa, did they ask you to sign anything?" "Les, did you?" "No." For the first time, she smiled. At the hotel, Samuel was waiting in a private conference room. He was in his 60s, silver-haired and exhausted. A sealed envelope lay on the table. Inside was a handwritten letter from Evelyn. She told me that she had watched the family reduce me little by little. First my career, then my friendships, then my confidence. She regretted not speaking sooner. But she had also watched me care for people when there was nothing to gain. She trusted my judgment because I had shown kindness without an audience. The final paragraph changed everything. Beatrice and Jacob were planning to sell 7 apartment buildings to a shell corporation called Breyer Holdings. The sale price was less than half their true value. Evelyn suspected that the shell company secretly belonged to them. If the sale closed, they could resell the properties and steal more than $40 million from Montgomery Heritage Group. The closing was scheduled for 10 the next morning. The emergency board meeting was at 9. We had 1 hour to stop them. Samuel opened several folders. Evelyn had collected copies of emails, draft contracts, and unusual transfers. But the most important document was missing proof that Beatrice controlled Breyer Holdings. Without that link, Beatrice could claim the sale was simply a bad business decision. I examined the false bank statements Beatrice had shown me from memory. The account numbers had been partly hidden, but I remembered the last 4 digits, 4417. Samuel searched Evelyn's files. One payment to a consulting company ended in the same 4 digits. The consulting company was called Alder Strategic Services. I recognized the name. For 2 years, I had seen envelopes from Alder arrive at the estate. Jacob always took them into his locked home office. "There may be records in that office," I said. Samuel shook his head. "You cannot return. They removed you from the property. The property belongs to the company, not Beatrice personally. And as voting trustee, I control the company. The trusteeship becomes operational when the death certificate and transfer notice are delivered tomorrow morning. Tonight, entering could create unnecessary risk." He was right. Then Nora asked whether I had access to any shared cloud accounts. Jacob had insisted that I handle household bills. He gave me access to a family document system years earlier and forgot about it because he assumed I understood nothing beyond groceries and dinner reservations. That assumption became his first serious mistake. We opened my laptop. The family folder still worked. At first, we found nothing. Then I searched for 4417. A scanned invoice appeared inside a folder labeled HIV Hasa Repairs. The invoice was fake, but its metadata showed it had been created by Jacob. A hidden attachment contained wiring instructions for Alder Strategic Services. The receiving bank was in Delaware. Samuel contacted a forensic investigator named Marcus Hale. Using public corporate records and Evelyn's authorized company files, Marcus traced Alder to a registered agent that also represented Breyer Holdings. It was a connection, but not proof of ownership. At 11:30, Jacob called me from a blocked number. His voice was soft now. "Alyssa, where are you? Why?" "I'm worried." Mom was upset. Things went too far. He sounded like the man I had married. For one dangerous moment, my heart responded before my mind did. Then I remembered him staring at his phone while my life rolled down those steps. "Did you steal the money, Jacob?" Silence. "I can fix this," he said. "Come back and sign the agreement. I'll increase the payment to $50,000. You accused me of stealing $840,000, and now you want to reward me with 50. It isn't like that." "Then explain what it is like." His breathing changed. Grandmother was confused. She made promises she didn't understand. So he knew. Samuel wrote a note and slid it toward me. "Keep him talking." I turned on the speaker. "What promises?" I asked. "Come home. Your mother said it was her property. She says things when she's angry. And the transfers. They can disappear." The room went still. "False bank records do not disappear," I said. Jacob realized his mistake. "I didn't say they were false. You said they could disappear." He ended the call. It was not a confession, but it was enough to show consciousness of fraud. More importantly, it confirmed that Jacob and Beatrice were working together. At midnight, an alert appeared on my email. Someone had attempted to reset my password for the family document account. Then the screen went black. They had removed my access. But they were too late. Marcus had already preserved authorized copies of everything we found. At 1 in the morning, Nora discovered the detail that broke the case open. The draft sale contract required Breyer Holdings to pay a $2 million deposit. The deposit had arrived 3 weeks earlier. She compared its transaction reference with payments from Montgomery Heritage Group. The money had traveled in a circle. First, Montgomery Heritage Group paid Alder Strategic Services for market research. Alder transferred the money to Breyer Holdings. Breyer then sent part of that same money back as the deposit to buy Montgomery properties. They were using the company's own money to purchase its buildings at half price. But we still needed the person behind the shell companies. At 2:15, my hotel room phone rang. The caller was Teresa Walsh, Beatrice's personal assistant of 17 years. She was crying. "I heard what happened at the house," she said. "Messes. Montgomery told the staff you stole from the family." "I didn't." "I know." Teresa explained that Beatrice had ordered her to destroy a box of old corporate documents that evening. Instead, she placed it in her car. She had spent years watching Beatrice punish employees who asked questions. Evelyn's death made her realize the documents might disappear forever. Inside the box was Breyer Holdings' original operating agreement. The beneficial owners were Beatrice Montgomery and Jacob Montgomery. We had our proof. The next morning, I entered Montgomery Heritage Group headquarters wearing clothes Nora had bought for me at a 24-hour department store. The navy suit was inexpensive, but it fit. My mother's letters were safe in the hotel vault. I carried no trash bags. Beatrice stood at the end of the boardroom table. Jacob sat to her right. 6 board members were present, along with the company's general counsel. When I walked in with Samuel and Nora, Beatrice laughed. "This meeting is private." Samuel placed Evelyn's death certificate and trust documents on the table. "Not from the controlling trustee," he said. The room fell silent. Beatrice read the first page. Her face changed slowly, like a wall cracking under pressure. "This is impossible." "It is binding," Samuel said. "Evelyn's trust owns 51% of the voting shares. Mrs. Alyssa Reed Montgomery is the sole voting trustee." Jacob stood so quickly that his chair struck the wall. Grandmother was not competent. Samuel opened another folder. 3 independent physicians evaluated her capacity. All confirmed that she understood the decision. Beatrice pointed at me. "She manipulated a dying woman." I took the seat at the head of the table. "Sit down, Beatrice." She stared at me. For 6 years, she had trained me to lower my voice whenever she raised hers. That morning, I discovered I did not need to shout. "This is my family's company," she said. "It belongs to its shareholders. And today, I represent the majority." The general counsel cleared his throat and confirmed Samuel's documents were valid. I called the meeting to order. My first motion was to suspend the sale to Breyer Holdings. My second was to place Kais and Jacob on administrative leave pending an independent fraud investigation. My third was to freeze all payments to Alder Strategic Services. The board approved each motion. Some members acted from integrity. Others acted from fear. I did not care which. The result was the same. Then Jacob tried to save himself. He said the shell companies belonged only to his mother. He claimed he had signed papers without reading them. Beatrice turned toward him with disbelief. You ungrateful coward. Their alliance lasted exactly as long as their confidence. I placed the operating agreement on the table. Both their signatures appeared beneath the ownership section. Then I played Jacob's midnight call. The room heard him say the transfers could appear. His face went gray. Beatrice reached for the document, but Nora moved it away. You cannot prove any loss. Beatrice snapped. Actually, I said, you were right about one thing. I was never anything in your family. I was not your partner. I was not your accomplice. And because you never considered me important, you conducted your scheme in front of me for years. I explained the circular transfers, the false invoices, and the below-market sale. I spoke slowly, as if presenting an audit. Every number led to another number. Every company led back to Beatrice and Jacob. By the time I finished, 2 federal investigators and 3 local detectives were waiting outside the boardroom. Samuel had contacted them before sunrise. No one was arrested that morning. Real investigations are not as fast as movies. The authorities collected devices, secured company servers, and interviewed employees. Beatrice left through the lobby while cameras from 2 local news stations recorded her hiding her face. Jacob followed behind her. For the first time in 6 years, he called my name in public. Alyssa, please. We can talk about this. I turned around. He looked smaller than he had on the marble steps. You had your chance to speak, I said. You chose your phone. Then I walked away. The investigation lasted 9 months. Auditors found that Beatrice and Jacob had diverted more than $12 million through fake consulting contracts. The attempted property sale would have cost the company another $43 million. They had created the false account in my name to make me a convenient suspect. If auditors noticed the missing money, Beatrice planned to blame me and use the signed separation agreement as evidence that I had fled after being confronted. That was the part that hurt most. Jacob had not simply failed to defend me. He had helped build the trap. He eventually accepted a plea agreement. Beatrice refused. She went to trial, certain that her name and connections would protect her. They did not. Teresa testified. So did the company controller, 2 former employees, and 1 banker. I spent 7 hours on the witness stand explaining how the transactions worked. The jury returned guilty verdicts on fraud, conspiracy, falsifying business records, and attempted theft. Beatrice was sentenced to 11 years in federal prison. Jacob received 4, followed by supervised release. Both were ordered to repay the stolen money. I filed for divorce the morning after the board meeting. Jacob contested everything until his criminal attorney reminded him that a divorce trial could expose even more records. He signed the settlement 2 weeks later. I did not take the estate. The mansion had never felt like a home. The company sold it, and we used part of the money to reimburse employees whose retirement fund had been quietly charged for Beatrice's fake consulting fees. I moved into a 2-bedroom apartment overlooking the James River. It had ordinary walls, a small kitchen, and no marble staircase. It was the first place in years where I could breathe. As trustee, I made changes Evelyn had wanted, but could never push through. We added independent board members. We created anonymous reporting channels. We reviewed executive spending and restored money to tenant maintenance budgets. I also returned to accounting. Not as the junior employee Beatrice had mocked, but as the leader of a new internal integrity division. I hired people who knew how easily powerful families could hide cruelty behind polished doors. 1 year after Evelyn's death, I visited her grave. I brought white roses and the first annual report published under the reformed company. On the final page was a photograph of Evelyn, standing outside her first boarding house in 1968. Beneath it were the words she had written in one of her notebooks. Property can be inherited. Character must be built. I sat beside the grave and told her what had happened. I told her that the company had survived. I told her that hundreds of employees had kept their jobs and that the apartment buildings had not been sold. Then I thanked her, not for the shares, for seeing me when I had forgotten how to see myself. Sometimes people imagine revenge as a dramatic moment, a slammed door, a public humiliation, or an enemy begging for mercy. Mine was quieter. It was waking up without fear. It was signing my maiden name again. It was watching honest employees enter a company that no longer belonged to 2 people who treated everyone else as disposable. And it was understanding that the trash bags on those marble steps had not contained my life. They had contained the last pieces of a prison I was finally leaving. Beatrice told me I had never been anything. She was wrong. I was the witness she ignored, the woman her son betrayed, and the one person Evelyn trusted to protect everything they tried to steal. They threw me out in the rain believing they had taken my future. By sunrise, I held theirs in my hands, and this time, justice was the one thing I refused to throw away.